But today I'll introduce you Mr. Stephen Hopkins. He's a leadership coach and consultant. Stephen brings a unique perspective from a broad background of leadership experience, including military business, nonprofit, and church settings. Stephen is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 2012, U.S. Army Ranger School, and Asbury Theological Seminary in 2018. His aim is to help leaders and individuals live an integrated and intentional life in which they are deeply attuned to living from their truest self and bringing life and positive transportation wherever they go. He currently lives in Kingsport with his wife, Wendy, and his 4 children, Kellen, Lily, Mary, and Ella. So if y'all don't mind, please stand and give a warm welcome to Mr. Stephen Hopkins.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me here today. When I visited probably about a month ago, and it was the day that the K-9 unit was here, which was a great presentation. But then I was like, well, can't follow the K-9s. I am not a dog, so that's going to be tough. But no, just take a little bit of time just to talk about leadership, and specifically, which is boring. So I didn't want to start with that. I had to tell a dog joke to get you to pay attention to this part. But coaching is a methodology for developing leaders. Does it sound as boring as it sounds when I say it? No, maybe, kind of, it's okay. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute, but I think I appreciate the bio and little introduction, but that's sort of not, well, some of that gets to where my interest in leadership and leadership development came from. So it really started, I guess, when I was a kid. So my dad worked for Wellmont back when Wellmont was a thing, pre-Ballot Health. Most of you will remember Wellmont, but he was an accountant. So he was the director of internal auditing and legal compliance, which I know that very explicitly because it was on his voicemail. So whenever we call, and I would get John Hopkins, director of internal auditing and legal compliance. But his real passion was in developing leaders and in figuring out how can you help people to become their best self, to function in the capacity they need to, and to move overall with the direction of the organization. So he spent a lot of time with that. It was really, I think, where I was first introduced to it. But I was in middle school and high school, and so it doesn't mean anything to me then, right? My biggest understanding of what leadership was like for movies, like bad movies, like sports movies, war movies. That's where it came from. And so I'd say my first shaping of it was from that and from learning what kinds of leadership I didn't want to have or to emulate. So maybe you can relate to this. I think I just saw it a lot when I was younger, but it started really in high school. So I played football at Sylvan South, again, back when that existed. And I wasn't great, full confession. I was pretty good my senior year. We had a good team my senior year. But sophomore, junior year, I was too slow to play like a fun position, like wide receiver or running back or something like that. I tried out, though. I tried out every year. I thought this was my year. I was going to be the star. And then every single year, they sent me back down to the offensive line. And they didn't tell me I was too slow, but I was too slow. And that's what it was. But I was also too small to play on the offensive line, which I learned pretty quickly, right? So it was one of those days where I was getting the snot beat out of me. And I probably had a concussion, but they didn't think about that, back then. So I was getting just destroyed. And I had some guy come up to me, just yelling at me, trying to motivate me. It's like, I'm as motivated as I can get. But I'm 160 pounds on the offensive line. I can't do anything about that. Just getting destroyed. And then one of the coaches came over, grabbed me by the face mask. There was dip spit flying. I was like, oh, well, that's not it. Whatever good leadership is, I don't feel like it's not working for me. Then a few years later, once I got up to West Point during the cadet basic training, they had this thing that was called the Leadership Reaction Course, which was, you may have seen one of these or done one of these before. It's basically a team-based obstacle course. So similar to like if you've done a ropes course type of thing, except what made this unique is you had different scenarios at each station, and you'd be given just some random stuff, right? So like a 55-gallon drum and a rope. It's like, your job is to imagine there's a ravine and a river crossing and there's a minefield over here and you have to get this drum over across the river. So you really have to use your imagination because what you're actually looking at is a couple of logs and just some dirt, But you'd have like 10, 15 minutes to do this scenario, and part of the way they designed it was so that it would be almost impossible for you to accomplish. And of course, the whole point is the point isn't actually doing the thing. The point is how the leader responds to the challenge of a near impossible situation. So I didn't know that at the time. It took me a long time to figure that out, actually. But one of the things I realized is that it was never helpful when the person in leadership started just yelling, right? I think it was most of my impression, and just honestly, talking to folks, most of their impression of military leadership is they yell a lot. But it's just not very effective. And so the higher the anxiety level from the person in charge, the higher the anxiety level for the rest of the team, and that doesn't really always help you think very clearly and solve complex problems. So I learned kind of early what I didn't want to do. But then I also saw great examples of what good leadership could look like, of thoughtful, calm, decisive, clear, direct leadership. So all that to say, I think it might be helpful for us to just take a minute and define it. So many of you have, honestly, way more experience than I do with this, but just to be on the same page, I think it's good. So John Maxwell talked about leadership. He said leadership is influence. Leadership is influence. So you may have heard that before. And of course, what he's getting at there is this idea that in a real sense, right, every single one of us have a certain amount of influence that we can leverage in the world. And that, in turn, makes you something of a leader, right? No matter what your job title or position, or if you have people who, like, quote, report to you or not. If you don't believe that, he read the bio. I have 3 girls in my house under the age of 10. Okay, Lily, Mary, and Ellie. It's 10, 6, and 1.5. They exert an inordinate amount of influence over my daily life. Right? They in effect, have a great deal of leadership capacity within our family. So that's one sense, right? But then there's another sense, which a lot of us are familiar with when we think of leadership, where it's just someone who's in a position, a role, someone who's got a job, right? It's where you have to direct an organization or get people to move in a certain direction, which is probably a sense that we're pretty familiar with. So when I think about good leadership, the way I like to phrase it is it's leveraging the influence that you have to point people to a good end, like an objectively good end. Because someone could be good at being a leader, in one sense, leveraging their influence, but leading people to an objectively bad end, right? Which would not exactly be good leadership. I mean, it is for you. I don't know. I wouldn't put it that way. So when we think about leadership, that's generally what I'm talking about. Which brings me to another important point, which is what is the role of a leader in any given organization, or really just in any walk of life? There's a lot of different ways that you could parse this out, and it depends really on your perspective. But one of the things that I've experienced, that I've just seen, is that a good leader will always bring out the best in the people around them. So 2 examples. One of a bad example of this, and another of a pretty good one. So I deployed in 2014. I was in East Afghanistan. At the time, I was a rifle platoon leader in the 82nd Airborne Division. And we had just it was the end of Operation Enduring Freedom. So we were an infantry battalion at the end of this major combat operation. They just didn't really have like a very specific role for us, but they just found stuff for us to do, which was great experience. But I had a company commander, so he's my direct supervisor, my boss. And bless him, he was a nice guy, but he had to have been the vaguest person I've ever met. And so, again, I don't know what it is with dip, but this coming out a lot too, because he always had a dip in. Not that that's, no judgment upon his character or anything else. He just always did. I have very fond memory of this. So he'd always have his bottle that he was spitting into, and he would always use bad cliches, right? So he'd say, like, hey, why don't you just dig into the weeds on that? Let me know what you get. Or, hey, just hit the wave tops, just hit the wave tops on this, and we'll just, just crunch numbers and let me know if the juice is worth the squeeze. All right, Hopkins, sound good? Yeah. All right, just get back to me when you can. It's like, that's not helpful. And all it did, like, honestly, I remember talking to my other platoon leaders that we were with, and just like, it was so hard. Because one, we didn't know what we were supposed to do most of the time. And often the juice was not worth the squeeze. But, it was hard because he was so vague and not very clear and direct. So he did not bring out the best in us. And part of that was on me. I wasn't particularly motivated to work for him. That's a whole separate set of issues. But different example, though, was the same deployment, but my battalion commander. So it was my 2-level up supervisor. So my boss's boss. He would go out on patrol with us, just really to get out with his different platoons, see how they were doing. It was somewhat evaluative, but then also supportive, where he's just letting us know that he was there, cared about us, thought about us. So we were on this one particular. Our job for this, our mission, was really just to go to this village, talk to some of the village elders. That was about it. Just make our presence known. Don't do anything crazy. Don't get in any fights. Just go say hi, shake some hands, go back home. So that's what we were doing. Everything was going great. The Afghan police outpost was a couple kilometers away, maybe like the valley, next ridge line over, got into a fight with the Taliban. While we're in this village, I'm just trying to shake hands, It's like, I don't have time for this today. And my battalion commander's here. So there was like an added layer of pressure for me to make sure I was making good decisions. And, there was traffic coming on the radio. Hey, they're requesting help. They want us to come help. It's like, well, what's the situation? Well, they said that, they're probably going to be okay. They're not being overrun. It's just a couple guys, but they really want us to come check it out. And I really did not want to go check it out. So I was trying to figure out what to do, and I turned to my battalion commander because he's my boss's boss. He's right there. It's like, hey, sir, what do you? Should we go? What do you think we should do? To which he responded not with an answer, but with a question. It's like, well, what do you think we should do? Well, that's why I'm asking you, because I don't know. He said, well, what's your mission? So I told him what we were doing. He said, well, what was the commander's intent on this? Do you remember, like, for this whole operation? So thought about it, shared that with him. He's like, well, what are you doing right now? It's like, well, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. He's like, so what do you think you should do? It's like, well, I think we should go back home. He's like, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, go for it. But the difference is that it was through him asking clarifying questions, not telling me what to do, and giving me that space to kind of figure it out on my own, that he not only helped me to become a better leader, think through some of those processes, but it helped to bring out the best in me. Which, remember, I talked about one of the marks of a good leader is they bring out the best in people. It's one of their very important and necessary functions, to bring out the best in the people around them. I feel like he did that. It's just one example of it. Which brings me to this idea of that I started with, and that I think he really exemplified, which is coaching as a methodology for developing leaders. So when I talk about coaching, which is a lot of what I do, coaching, most of the time you think of like sports coaches, football coaches, but some definition on the word is important, I think. So the word itself, it's an old English word, coach. It comes from the horse-drawn carriage back in like the 1600s, thereabouts, right? And so it's just a word for something that moved people from point A to point B. That's what a coach was. And sometime in the early 1900s, this word came to be applied to specifically like sports coaches, as someone who helped move the team from point A to point B. So functionally what coaching is, it's a process for helping people to move from point A to point B. That can be hard sometimes, and sometimes for different reasons, right? One, we may not know exactly where point B is, or where we're trying to get to. That's why, like you talked about strategic planning, planning's so important. If for nothing else, sometimes you just got to know where it is that you're actually trying to go. Because if you don't know where you're trying to go, then how are you going to know when you get there? So sometimes people don't really even know quite where they are at the moment, which is good too. You got to take a minute and just kind of assess where you are at any given moment. So one of the things I wanted to do is just to leave with you a very simple tool for coaching. It's called the GROW method. Is anyone familiar with that? It's relatively simple, like I said. It takes just some questions to kind of pull it out of people, but it's fairly easy. So it starts with the goal, right? This is the G. So it's GROW. It's an acronym. That's the word, right? Yeah, okay. I was thinking there. But G is goal, right? So it starts with defining very clearly where you're trying to get to. Just being clear on that. Because again, if you don't know where you're trying to go, then how will you know when you get there? And it's just about being as specific as you possibly can without being too restrictive, making it measurable in some way, a realistic goal, a goal that's time-bound. So just trying to get really clear on the goal, right? Then the next step is just figure out where it is that you actually are right now. So this is helpful if you think about it in terms like a GPS. Back in the day, when you had to use a map, this was maybe more immediately important. We take it for granted when you just put it in your phone and just go. But if you just have a destination, you still don't know the route. So you need your destination and you need your point of origin. You need where you are in order to actually figure out a path and to figure out the route, figure out how to get to the destination. So you need to figure out where you actually are. And again, it's about being as specific as possible. And one of the things that's really hard and just working through it with clients, and honestly, I was doing a lot of this week. I really enjoy this, which is good because it's what I do. But it's hard because sometimes you have to be really honest, and it's not always particularly fun to be really honest about where you are if where you are isn't where you want to be, which is where many times we are in life, which is where the coaching process is helpful. So you need the goal, you need your current reality, that's the R, and then you have the O, which are the options, the opportunities, the obstacles. It's basically like looking at what's standing in the way for me getting from point A to point B. What's keeping me from being there right now? In other words, what's the gap between where we want to be and where we currently are? And so that can be any number of things, and it depends on your goal. But that will be dependent upon where you are in the sense of what we need to accomplish. So I'll give you an example. If I say my goal is that I want to lose 15 pounds, the reality that I have right now will determine the actual route, which is the opportunities and obstacles that I face. If I only have 15 pounds to lose, then my methods, my options, my obstacles are going to be very different than if I had 50 pounds to lose. Does that make sense? So that's going to determine a lot. So it's just a process of you determine your goal, where you are, what are the options, how you could possibly get there, what are the obstacles that maybe stand in the way, and then it's just a matter of charting a few different paths, a few different ways forward, picking one and sticking to it. So relatively simple, goal, current reality, what are the options, pick a path. You can use that with your kids, with your grandkids, with coworkers, with anybody you talk to. It's sometimes helpful just to help us use it for yourself too. I do this quite a lot in terms of like planning for myself, businesses, stuff like that. But yeah, I just wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions here at the end in case you had anything. Happy to do it. If not, I will be around after to talk if you'd like to do that as well. So.